For years, China laughed at America's drone fleet. State media called them expensive toys, easy targets for modern air defense. Beijing's generals paraded their sleek new interceptors and boasted that no slow-moving aircraft could survive in contested airspace. The MQ-9 Reaper, they said, was built for hunting insurgents in sandals, not for facing a real military power. Then something changed. In classified briefings and wargame simulations, Chinese strategists stopped laughing. The Reaper they dismissed as obsolete had evolved into something they never anticipated. Not faster, not stealthier, but deadlier in ways that turned their entire defensive strategy inside out. What transformed a counterterrorism workhorse into Beijing's newest nightmare, and why did the drone they mocked become the one platform they cannot ignore? The answer lies not in what the Reaper used to be, but in what American engineers quietly turned it into while the world was not paying attention. In 2007, the first MQ-9 Reapers arrived over Iraq carrying Hellfire missiles and a simple mission: find terrorists, fix their position, and finish them. The aircraft was purpose-built for the counterinsurgency grind. It could loiter for 14 hours watching a compound or a road, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Pilots sat in trailers at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, flying combat missions halfway around the world through satellite links. For the insurgents below, there was no warning, just the sudden crack of a missile and the realization that the sky had been watching all along. The Reaper became the backbone of targeted strike operations across Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, JASSM, and Somalia. Between 2007 and 2015, Reapers flew over 2 million combat hours, more than any manned strike aircraft in the same period. The numbers tell the story. Thousands of high-value targets eliminated, command networks disrupted, and convoys destroyed before they ever reached the front line. The drone proved that persistence matters. When a fighter jet has to refuel and return to base every few hours, the Reaper stays on station, watching and waiting. That endurance changed how wars were fought, but the success came with a cost. The Reaper was never designed to survive against advanced threats. Its cruising speed maxes out at 230 miles per hour, slower than most World War II fighters. It has no afterburner, no evasive maneuvers, no chaff or flare dispensers. The airframe is built from lightweight composites to save weight, not to absorb damage. Against an enemy with no air force and no radar-guided missiles, that was fine. Against a peer competitor with integrated air defenses, it looked like a death sentence. Chinese military analysts watched the Reaper's deployment and drew their conclusions. In papers published by the People's Liberation Army's National Defense University, strategists dismissed remotely piloted aircraft as viable only in permissive environments. One officer writing in 2016 called them fragile platforms suitable for policing failed states, not for contesting airspace against a modern military. The assumption was simple: any drone slow enough to loiter is slow enough to shoot down. Beijing's air defense network, bristling with HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles and J-20 stealth fighters, would swat Reapers from the sky like flies. The math seemed obvious: speed kills, and the Reaper had none. That confidence extended to China's own drone programs. Beijing poured billions into developing high-speed unmanned combat aerial vehicles, sleek designs like the GJ-11 Sharp Sword and the Wing Lung series. These platforms emphasize speed and stealth, built to penetrate enemy airspace and strike before defenses could react. Chinese engineers believed the future belonged to fast movers, not slow cruisers. The Reaper, in their view, was already obsolete, a relic of the war on terror with no place in a high-intensity conflict. Western analysts echoed some of those concerns. Think tank reports warned that the Reaper's days were numbered in contested environments. The drone had thrived in the Middle East, where the enemy had no fighters and no sophisticated radar systems. But in the Pacific, facing the full weight of Chinese air defenses, the Reaper would be vulnerable. Some voices in the Pentagon even questioned whether the platform had a future beyond counterterrorism. The debate raged in defense journals and congressional hearings. Was the Reaper a one-trick pony, brilliant for one kind of war but useless in the next? What the critics missed was the Reaper's greatest strength. It was not the airframe or the speed, it was the open architecture, the ability to adapt, to carry new sensors, new weapons, new mission systems without redesigning the entire aircraft. While China invested in purpose-built platforms, the United States invested in a platform that could become whatever the mission required. That flexibility, dismissed as a compromise, would turn out to be the ace in the deck. Inside a secure facility at General Atomics in Southern California, a team of engineers gathered around a Reaper prototype in 2018. The task was straightforward on paper but revolutionary in practice. They were going to arm the drone with something it was never designed to carry. Not another Hellfire missile, but a weapon that could reach out hundreds of miles and strike targets the drone would never even see. The goal was to turn a tactical aircraft into a strategic asset, transforming the Reaper from a hunter of pickup trucks into a hunter of warships and command centers. The weapon in question was the AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, better known as JASSM. This is not a small munition. JASSM weighs 2,400 pounds, nearly as much as a compact car. It flies over 200 miles on its own power. Guided by GPS and inertial navigation, able to strike within 3 meters of its target. Originally designed for bombers and fighters, JASSM was built to penetrate defended airspace and destroy hardened targets like bunkers, radar sites, and warships. It carries a 1,000-pound penetrator warhead, enough to crack reinforced concrete or punch through a ship's hull. The challenge was integration. The Reaper's hardpoints were rated for weapons a fraction of JASSM's size. The wing structure, the avionics, the flight control software, none of it was built to handle a missile that heavy or that complex. Engineers had to reinforce the pylons, recalculate the aircraft's center of gravity, and rewrite the mission computer's code to interface with JASSM's targeting system. Every test brought new problems. The added weight changed the drone's handling characteristics. The missile's data link required new wiring harnesses. Even the release mechanism had to be redesigned to ensure a clean separation without destabilizing the aircraft. Months of testing followed. Engineers flew the modified Reaper at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, running through simulated strikes and live releases with dummy rounds. They pushed the envelope, testing maximum gross weight configurations and extreme flight profiles. The goal was not just to prove the Reaper could carry JASSM, but that it could do so reliably, safely, and repeatedly. By late 2020, the system was ready for a live fire test. On a cold morning in December 2020, a Reaper took off from a remote airstrip carrying a single JASSM under its wing. The mission profile was simple. Fly to the launch point, acquire the target through the onboard sensor suite, and release. The target was a decommissioned ship anchored off the California coast, wired with sensors to measure the impact. At the designated range, the pilot, sitting in a control station hundreds of miles away, initiated the launch sequence. The missile dropped clean, ignited its engine, and disappeared toward the horizon. Minutes later, the JASSM slammed into the target dead center, sending a plume of smoke and debris skyward. The test was a success. The Reaper was no longer just a light attack platform. It was now a long-range strike asset. The implications rippled through defense circles. A drone that cost $32 million, a fraction of an F-35's price tag, could now deliver the same standoff punch as a manned bomber. And because the Reaper could stay airborne for over 24 hours, it could loiter in position, waiting for the target to appear or for conditions to align. No fighter pilot could do that. No bomber crew could sustain that kind of endurance. The Reaper had just redefined what an unmanned aircraft could contribute to a major conflict. But the innovation did not stop there. Engineers at General Atomics and Air Force laboratories saw an opportunity to go further. If the Reaper could carry JASSM, what else could it carry? The answer came in the form of another missile, one designed not for bunkers or buildings, but for ships. The long-range anti-ship missile, known as LRASM, is a variant of JASSM tailored for maritime strikes. It carries the same 1,000-pound warhead but adds a suite of sensors that allow it to hunt ships autonomously. LRASM can fly low over the water using terrain masking to avoid radar detection, then pop up and identify targets using onboard infrared imaging and electronic intelligence. It does not need constant guidance. Fire it toward a general area and the missile does the rest. Integrating LRASM onto the Reaper followed a similar path to JASSM, but the stakes were higher. Anti-ship warfare is not about hitting a stationary target. It is about engaging, moving, maneuvering vessels protected by layers of air defense. The Reaper's sensor suite had to be upgraded to provide targeting data accurate enough for over-the-horizon strikes. That meant fusing inputs from the drone's synthetic aperture radar, electro-optical cameras, and off-board intelligence feeds from satellites and other platforms. The mission computer had to process all that information in real time and pass it to the missile before launch. The first successful LRASM test from a Reaper came in 2021. The target was a decommissioned frigate steaming in open water defended by simulated radar and electronic warfare systems. The Reaper launched from standoff range, never coming within 150 miles of the target. The LRASM flew its programmed course, skimming the waves, then climbed and struck the frigate amidships. The impact was devastating. The missile punched through the hull and detonated inside, simulating a kill on a warship that would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build. The test proved that a $32 million drone could threaten billion-dollar surface combatants from distances they could not reach back. This was the moment Chinese confidence began to crack. For years, Beijing had invested in a blue-water navy, building destroyers, frigates, and aircraft carriers to project power across the Pacific. The plan was to use those ships to control sea lanes, deter American intervention, and dominate regional waters. But now, a slow-moving drone that Chinese analysts had dismissed as obsolete could launch missiles capable of sinking those same warships from ranges the ships could not defend against. The calculus had shifted. The genius of arming the Reaper with JASSM and LRASM was not just the capability itself, it was the economics. A single destroyer or cruiser represents an investment of $1 to $2 billion, not counting the years of training for the crew and the decades of operational life. A Reaper costs $32 million. A LRASM costs about $3 million. That means for the price of one Chinese destroyer, the United States could field 10 Reapers, each carrying missiles capable of sinking multiple ships. The exchange ratio is brutal. Even if the enemy shoots down half the drones, the remaining ones still deliver enough firepower to cripple a surface action group. And the Reaper does not need to get close. With the LRASM's 350-mile range and the Reaper's ability to launch from well outside defended airspace, the drone can strike without ever entering the engagement envelope of the enemy's air defenses. Surface-to-air missiles like the MQ-9 have a range of about 120 miles. By the time the destroyer's radar picks up the Reaper, the missile is already in the water, flying low and fast toward the target. The ship can try to intercept the incoming LRASM, but those defenses are finite. Each destroyer carries only so many interceptors, and each LRASM forces them to expend precious ammunition. The strategic impact goes beyond individual engagements. In a conflict over Taiwan or the South China Sea, China's plan relies on sea control. Their amphibious fleet, their carrier groups, and their supply lines all depend on the assumption that they can move ships freely within the first island chain. The Reaper, armed with LRASM, turns that assumption into a gamble. Every Chinese vessel operating in contested waters now has to account for the possibility that a drone, invisible on radar until it launches, is circling somewhere over the horizon, waiting for the order to strike. American planners call this sea denial. The goal is not to win a decisive naval battle, but to make the waters so dangerous that the enemy cannot operate freely. A dozen Reapers, each capable of launching multiple LRASMs, can threaten an entire invasion fleet. The drones can be dispersed across remote airstrips on islands throughout the Pacific, launched on short notice, and recalled if the situation changes. They do not need carrier support, massive logistics trains, or vulnerable surface ships to operate. They just need a runway, fuel, and a data link. The economics extend to production. General Atomics can build Reapers faster than any shipyard can build destroyers. The lead time for a new warship is 5 to 7 years. The lead time for a Reaper is measured in months. If the United States loses drones in combat, they can be replaced quickly. If China loses destroyers, each one is a strategic setback that takes years to recover from. The asymmetry is glaring. One side is playing a numbers game they can sustain, the other is not. Retired Navy officers who once questioned the Reaper's relevance now speak differently. One former submarine commander speaking at a 2023 defense conference put it bluntly. He said the Reaper does not need to survive to win, it just needs to get the shot off. And with LRASM, it can do that from ranges where the enemy cannot touch it. That is a paradigm shift. The drone is no longer judged by its survivability but by its ability to deliver effects before it is ever at risk. The psychological impact on adversary planning is just as important. Chinese naval doctrine is built around coordinated task forces, layered defenses, and the assumption that their ships can maneuver and defend themselves. But against a distributed fleet of armed Reapers, that coordination becomes a liability. Every ship has to worry not just about the threats it can see, but the ones it cannot. The ambiguity is paralyzing. Is that radar contact a harmless patrol, or is it a Reaper lining up a shot? The uncertainty forces commanders to adopt defensive postures, burning fuel and time reacting to ghosts. The real brilliance of the Reaper transformation is that it leverages existing technology in a new way. JASSM and LRASM were already in production. The Reaper airframe was already proven. The innovation was not inventing something new. It was recognizing that the pieces already existed and putting them together in a way no one had tried before. That is American ingenuity at its best. Not flashy, not headline-grabbing, but devastatingly effective. As Chinese strategists absorbed the implications of the Reaper's new capabilities, the tone of their assessment shifted. The dismissive language disappeared. In its place came sober analysis and calls for countermeasures. People's Liberation Army journals began publishing articles on how to detect and neutralize long-endurance unmanned platforms. The focus turned to extending radar coverage, deploying more interceptors, and integrating air defense networks to cover gaps. But every solution came with a cost, and every cost stretched resources thinner. The Reaper had become the problem Beijing never planned for. Not because it was invincible, but because it was everywhere. With over 300 MQ-9s in service and production lines still running, the United States could flood the Pacific with armed drones, each one a potential threat to high-value targets. The sheer numbers made comprehensive defense impossible. Chinese planners could not guard every ship, every radar site, every command center against an adversary that could launch from dozens of dispersed locations. The drone that was mocked as a relic of the war on terror had evolved into something far more dangerous. It proved that adaptability beats specialization, that endurance beats speed, and that the platform everyone ignores is often the one that changes the game. The MQ-9 Reaper did not get faster or stealthier, it got smarter, and in doing so it turned the calculus of Pacific power on its head. Right now, as Chinese warships patrol contested waters, American Reapers circle unseen, armed with missiles that can reach farther than any destroyer's guns. The laughter has stopped. What remains is the cold realization that in modern warfare, the underestimated often deliver the final blow. The Reaper's transformation is a reminder that innovation does not always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly at 25,000 feet, waiting for the moment to strike. And when it does, the world learns that yesterday's workhorse is today's war winner. What do you think? Can the Reaper maintain this edge, or will adversaries find a way to counter it? Drop your thoughts below.